The night the river changed history. On a cold April night in 1912, the Atlantic Ocean looked calm enough to fool even the most cautious sailor. The stars hung over the water like silent witnesses, and the sea stretched endlessly into darkness. On that quiet night, thousands of people believed they were traveling on the safest, most magnificent ship ever built. They believed they were witnessing the future of human engineering. But they were wrong. But the story of that night, though often told, holds deeper human truths, forgotten bravery, and strange coincidences that would shape maritime law, technology, and even American society for decades to come. This is the real story behind the tragedy that shocked the world. In the early 20th century, the world was obsessed with speed, industry, and progress. Europe and America were connected by an endless flow of immigrants, businessmen, and dreamers crossing the Atlantic Ocean. Ships were the lifeline between continents, and companies competed fiercely to build the largest and most luxurious ocean liners. One of those companies was the British shipping giant known as the White Star Line. Instead of focusing only on speed, the company wanted something different. Ships so grand, so luxurious, that passengers would choose them for comfort rather than speed. They planned 3 enormous liners: Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. The second ship would become the most famous. That ship was the RMS Titanic. When construction began in 1909 in the shipyards of Belfast, it was one of the largest engineering projects in the world. Over 15,000 workers labored day and night, using millions of steel rivets and hundreds of tons of machinery. The Titanic stretched about 882 feet long, longer than 4 city blocks. It stood as tall as an 11-story building and weighed more than 46,000 tons. At the time, it was the largest moving object ever built by humans. But size alone wasn't what amazed people. Inside, the ship resembled a floating palace. First-class passengers could walk through grand staircases made of oak wood and decorated with glass domes. There were luxurious dining rooms, smoking lounges, libraries, Turkish baths, a swimming pool, and even an onboard gymnasium. Some passengers joked that the Titanic was more comfortable than the finest hotels in New York City. Tickets for first class could cost the modern equivalent of over $100,000. Millionaires, industrialists, and celebrities rushed to secure seats for the ship's maiden voyage. Among them was American businessman John Jacob Astor IV, one of the richest men in the United States. Another famous passenger was Benjamin Guggenheim, heir to a powerful mining family. There was also Isidor Straus, co-owner of the famous department store Macy's. But the Titanic wasn't only for the wealthy. Deep in the lower decks, hundreds of third-class passengers crowded into modest cabins. Many of them were immigrants traveling to America, hoping for a new life. Families from Ireland, Sweden, Italy, and Eastern Europe carried their dreams across the ocean toward the promise of opportunity. For them, America meant hope. The Titanic finally departed on April 10, 1912, from the English port of Southampton. Thousands gathered at the docks to watch the massive ship slowly move away from the harbor. Steam rose from its 4 giant funnels, while powerful engines pushed the ship into the open sea. But even before reaching the Atlantic, the ship narrowly avoided disaster. As the Titanic left the dock, the suction created by its enormous propellers accidentally pulled another ship, the SS New York, toward it. The ropes tying the smaller ship snapped under pressure. For a moment, it looked like the 2 ships would collide. Crew members rushed to reverse engines, and tugboats intervened just in time. Many later called this a bad omen. After leaving England, the Titanic stopped briefly in Cherbourg and then in Queenstown to pick up additional passengers. Then the ship turned westward toward the open Atlantic and the distant shores of America. Life on board quickly settled into routine.
Life on board quickly settled into routine. First-class passengers enjoyed elaborate meals prepared by world-class chefs. Dinner menus included oysters, roast duck, lamb with mint sauce, and luxurious desserts. Meanwhile, third-class passengers gathered in common rooms where music filled the air. Many played traditional folk songs from their home countries, while children ran through narrow corridors. Though separated by class, everyone shared the same journey across the cold ocean. Yet far ahead, hidden in the dark waters, danger waited. In April 1912, the North Atlantic was unusually crowded with icebergs. Massive chunks of ice had broken free from glaciers in Greenland and drifted south along ocean currents. Ships in the area began sending warnings through the relatively new wireless radio technology. Several ships reported ice fields directly in Titanic's path. One of those warnings came from the SS Californian. Another came from the RMS Carpathia. But the Titanic's wireless operators were overwhelmed with passenger messages being sent to friends and family in America. Many iceberg warnings were received, but not delivered to the bridge immediately. Meanwhile, Captain Edward Smith continued the journey at nearly full speed. At the time, this was a common practice. Ships often maintained speed even in icy waters because captains believed they could spot icebergs in time to steer around them. But the night of April 14th would prove how dangerous that assumption was. The sea was eerily calm. Normally, waves break against icebergs, making them easier to see. But that night, the water was flat like glass. Without waves, icebergs blended almost perfectly into the darkness. At 11:40 p.m., two lookouts stationed high above the deck suddenly saw something directly ahead: an iceberg. They rang the warning bell 3 times and telephoned the bridge. "Iceberg right ahead." First Officer William Murdoch immediately ordered the ship to turn and reverse engines. The massive vessel slowly began to change direction, but the Titanic was simply too large. The iceberg scraped along the starboard side of the ship for only about 10 seconds. At first, the collision didn't seem serious. Many passengers barely noticed anything. But below the waterline, the iceberg had ripped open multiple compartments of the ship's hull. The Titanic had been designed with watertight compartments that could seal if damaged. Engineers believed the ship could survive flooding in up to 4 compartments. The iceberg opened 6. Water began pouring into the lower decks at an unstoppable rate. The ship's chief designer, Thomas Andrews, quickly inspected the damage. His conclusion was devastating. The Titanic would sink, and it would sink within 2 hours. Captain Smith gave the order to prepare lifeboats, but there was another shocking problem. The Titanic carried lifeboats for only about half of the people on board. At the time, maritime regulations were outdated and based on ship weight rather than passenger capacity. The Titanic technically met the legal requirements, but there were over 2,200 people on board and only about 1,178 lifeboat seats. As panic slowly spread, crew members began loading lifeboats with women and children first. Many passengers still refused to believe the ship was in serious danger. Some lifeboats were launched only half full. Meanwhile, the ship's musicians continued playing music in the first-class lounge to calm passengers. Their leader was Wallace Hartley. Witnesses later reported that the band played hymns and gentle melodies even as the deck tilted beneath their feet. Nearby ships saw distress rockets fired into the night sky. The closest ship, the SS Californian, saw the rockets but failed to recognize them as distress signals. The ship that did respond was the RMS Carpathia. Captain Arthur Rostron immediately ordered his ship to race toward Titanic's location at full speed through dangerous ice fields. But the Carpathia was over 50 miles away. It would take hours to arrive. Meanwhile, the Titanic continued sinking lower into the freezing Atlantic. By 2 a.m., only a few lifeboats remained. Hundreds of passengers crowded the sloping deck. Just 20 minutes later, at 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912, the great ship disappeared beneath the ocean. More than 1,500 people lost their lives that night. The tragedy became one of the deadliest maritime disasters in history. When the RMS Carpathia finally arrived, lifeboats filled with survivors were scattered across the dark ocean. In total, only about 705 people survived. The world was stunned. Newspapers in New York City published massive headlines. Crowds gathered outside the offices of the White Star Line, demanding answers. Within weeks, official investigations began in both the United States and Britain. These inquiries uncovered many shocking facts. There were not enough lifeboats. Ice warnings had been ignored. Radio operators were not required to stay on duty 24 hours a day, and ships lacked coordinated emergency communication systems. The disaster led directly to major safety reforms. In 1914, international governments created the International Maritime Organization safety standards that required enough lifeboats for all passengers and mandatory radio monitoring at all times. Another lasting change was the creation of the International Ice Patrol, which still monitors icebergs in the North Atlantic today. For decades, the Titanic itself remained hidden deep beneath the ocean floor. Many believed it might never be found. Then, in 1985, a team led by oceanographer Robert Ballard finally located the wreck, nearly 12,500 feet below the surface of the Atlantic. The ship had split into two massive sections, resting silently in the darkness. Rust-covered railings, broken decks, and scattered personal belongings told the quiet story of that terrible night. Shoes, suitcases, and dishes still lay where they had fallen more than 70 years earlier. The discovery shocked the world once again. It reminded humanity not only of the tragedy, but also of the fragile nature of technological pride. The Titanic had once been called Unsinkable, but history proved that no machine is beyond nature's power. And yet, within that tragedy, there were also countless acts of courage. Passengers giving up lifeboat seats for strangers, crew members working until the final moments to save others, musicians playing calm melodies as the ocean rose around them. The story of the Titanic is not just about disaster. It is about human choices under pressure, the cost of overconfidence, and the quiet bravery that appears in the darkest moments. Even today, more than a century later, the legend of the Titanic continues to capture imaginations around the world. Because sometimes history is not just written in books,